Welcome to the next episode of Apophatic Antifragility. Didn't get too many questions on the last one, so I guess everybody's using their dictionaries, thumbing through, looking up definitions. I'd like to see more interaction because I need to know what you need to know in order to present things in a way that's more assimilable. So I've got a lot of material to cover in this episode. Let's get right into it. Just a quick review. Apophatic antifragility. The term apophatic antifragility finally enables us to express and examine the essential nature of the Buddha's teaching, his method, and its result. This becomes especially clear when we analyze the Buddha's original Dhamma, Vinaya, and Sangha in terms of antifragility. The contrast with the fragility of modern Buddhism is most striking. But of course, before we proceed further, we must clearly define our terms. Definition of apophatic is from Greek apophatikos, negative. It can be knowledge obtained by negation, via negativa, for example, in the Buddha's teaching, no self. Ineffable knowledge, inarticulable by words or symbols. The higher stages of meditation, for example, cannot be explained in words. They're simply beyond words for a variety of reasons, which we'll get into later. Any phenomenon or method that cannot be explicitly described by our current vocabulary. And this is a problem for Westerners who want to study the Buddha's teaching. He's talking about things we don't have any words for. So how can we expand our vocabulary in a way that allows us to conceptualize the terms used in the Buddha's teaching? Just for example, the term Dhamma. I did a whole hour video just on the meaning of Dhamma. There is really no Western equivalent for the word Dhamma. There are a bunch of phrases that approximate its meaning, but the actual precise meaning is not expressible in any Western language that I know of. So we have a big problem with methods and phenomena in the Buddha's teaching that can't be described by our terminology. And finally, apophatic can be talking around a subject without direct specific mention. For example, Nibbana. Nibbana cannot be talked about, cannot be spoken about, because it's not something that's amenable to words and symbols. So what to do? Well, we can talk around it, we can talk about how to reach it, and we can talk about the symptoms and so on of attaining Nibbana. But we can't really explain what Nibbana is. You have to experience it for yourself. So in that way, the Buddha's teaching is apophatic because you have to actually practice it to understand what it means. You can't understand it just by thinking or just by words. Not possible. Sorry. Now let's talk about the definition of antifragile. Antifragile, in one way, is the antonym of fragile, but not any of the ordinary definitions of fragile, because those are covered by words like durability, robustness, and indestructible, and so on like that. And those imply that something is damaged, but it can be restored. We're not talking about that at all. We're talking about antifragile as non-linearly sensitive to benefit from volatility, such as stress, randomness, unpredictability, chaos, unexpected events, disorder, unforeseen consequences, uncertainty, and time. Something that's fragile is non-linearly sensitive to harm from volatility. Something that's antifragile is non-linearly sensitive to benefit from volatility, unexpected events, the improbable, luck, not skill. And these things happen all the time. And that's why, well, we'll get into all of the ramifications of this meaning in a minute. I want to get to the subject of today's video. Let's start by exploring the Buddha's idea of the connection between ignorance and suffering. The Blessed One said, "From ignorance as a requisite condition, then aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair come into play. Such is the origination of this entire mass of stress and suffering." So the Buddha here runs down the whole list of stages in dependent origination, and then each one becomes the cause of the next stage, and finally we get down to death and suffering. So the original cause of all this suffering that everyone's experiencing is ignorance. Well, what kind of ignorance? Exactly what do we mean by ignorance in this particular application? It can't be a lack of information, because especially today we have so much information, but it's a failure to interpret information properly due to epistemological deficiency. That's where the title of this video comes from. In other words, we're not talking about a lack of information, but an inability to understand the actual meaning of that information, to interpret the information properly and to act on it properly. And that's why we're suffering. Not because we have no knowledge, but because we have too much knowledge that is improperly evaluated and insufficiently understood. So let's go on. Here's a quote on ignorance and suffering. "And how is there the yoke of ignorance? There is the case where a certain person does not discern, as it actually is present, the origination, the passing away, the allure, the drawbacks, and the escape from the six sense media. When he does not discern, as it actually is present, the origination, the passing away, the allure, the drawbacks, and the escape from the six sense media, then, with regard to ignorance concerning the six sense media, he is obsessed with not knowing. This is the yoke of sensuality, the yoke of becoming, the yoke of views, and the yoke of ignorance." So in other words, ignorance doesn't mean that we're unaware of something, that we're hiding our heads in the sand. What it really means is that we don't perceive things as they really are. We're suffering, in other words, not from a lack of information, but from an illusion about that information. The illusory interpretation or misunderstanding the meaning of that information, of that experience, is what causes our suffering. And especially not discerning the escape. And we'll get to that later. That's going to be toward the end of the series. But first we have to understand, why are we falling into this trap? Why are we subject to illusion? What kind of illusion, and how can we overcome it? Let's take a look at epistemology. If we have an epistemological failure, we need to know what epistemology is. Epistemology is a noun from Greek episteme, knowledge, plus logia, discourse. It can mean the theory or science of knowledge with regard to its grounds, methods, validity, and scope. That's the ordinary or most common meaning of epistemology. How do we know what we know? If we start looking into this, we're going to find out all kinds of unsuspected, surprising things about how we know what we know. And of course, the most surprising thing is that in many cases we don't really know what we think we know. We're just guessing. The second definition is the investigation of what distinguishes justified belief from opinion. Anybody can have an opinion. Just go to any public place or like a bar and ask somebody, well, what do you think? Are the Cubs going to win the series this year? And they'll have an opinion. Doesn't matter whether they know anything about it or not. Maybe they heard somebody else talking about it and they just adopt their opinion without thinking about it, without really knowing anything about it. So it's easy to have an opinion. But a justified belief has to be based on evidence. So how do we understand the evidence that leads to more than an opinion, to something actually justified or actually substantial? Finally, epistemology investigates the question, what is knowing and the known? Or more concisely, what is knowledge? Knowledge consists of both knowing and the known, and the relationship between them. In other words, knowledge is an ontological triple. Now, if you didn't take my advice last time and go back over some of our earlier videos, you won't know what we're talking about. Too bad. I already explained it in detail. Go back and watch those videos and understand our vocabulary and the conceptual tools that we use. Then you'll be able to keep up with us. Otherwise, you're going to be lost. I'm sorry. So epistemology is actually something very important to all of us. How do we know what we know? How do we know that what we know is actually knowledge and not simply an opinion? How do we connect our knowledge with the evidence that supports it? And is that connection valid? These are some of the questions we're going to be looking into in this series. Now let's look up deficiency. Deficiency is a noun, meaning a failing or shortcoming, the quality or state of being deficient or wanting. Some synonyms are a defect, a fault, a flaw, an imperfection, a weakness, weak point, inadequacy, shortcoming, limitation, or failure, want, lack, absence, insufficiency. So an epistemological deficiency means, among other things, failure to distinguish fact from opinion. In short, ignorance. Now, I know we're talking about an area of human affairs, spiritual life, where everybody thinks they have an opinion, and everybody thinks their opinion is right, and everybody else's is wrong. Some people have said, if you want to start an argument, bring up money, politics, or religion. Because nobody wants to accept another person's opinion. And this is a good idea. It's better to research things for yourself and understand from your own point of view what consists of knowledge, what consists of facts, and what consists of just opinions. And as we'll see later, most of what people think are facts are actually just elaborately disguised opinions. So we have an epistemological deficiency. We don't have an adequate means of determining what is knowledge, what is true knowledge, and how to evaluate that knowledge. We don't learn these things in school unless we take charge of our own education. Because the people who run the schools and who design the curriculum aren't interested in us knowing these kind of things. Because then we wouldn't simply listen to our instructions on what to think. We would think for ourselves instead. And that's very inconvenient. We don't make good robots if we counter every instruction from the elite with, why should I do that? Or, can you prove it? So the people who design and manage the public schools don't want us to know anything about epistemology. And they certainly don't want us to realize that we have a deficiency in that area. They want us to simply read or watch the news and accept whatever we're told. But if we really want to understand what's going on in our lives, in the world, and in the Buddha's teaching, then we're not going to do that. We're going to have to develop a robust epistemology. So our epistemological deficiency has a particular result. And I made some tables showing the typical results of epistemological deficiency. Mainly, when we think we see this, we are generally seeing this. When we think we're seeing skill, most of the time we're seeing luck. Take any entertainer, movie star, politician, successful businessman, what have you. Almost all of them can tell you a story about their lucky break. Everything was going along, they were struggling, they weren't getting anywhere, maybe for years at a stretch. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, they get a lucky break. They meet some movie producer, or they, I don't know, they get airplay on some important radio show or something like that for a musician. Or they get recognized by some political power broker as a potential candidate, and boom, their luck goes sky high, they become. Or, they just get on candid camera. And all of a sudden, or win the lottery, and all of a sudden everybody's heard of them. So fame and to a large extent success is principally a matter of luck. All it takes is one extraordinary piece of good luck to make somebody's whole lifetime. We'll see how that works later. So in the same way, when we think we see determinism, we're actually seeing randomness. The things that happen that boost a person to success are often attributed to their determination, their determinism. But actually, they simply happen to be in the right place at the right time. They simply happen to invest in the right market just before it took off, or something like that. And of course, after the fact, it's really easy to justify it and say, oh yeah, I knew what I was doing all the time, of course. But of course, that doesn't see the failures. Certainty. Whenever we see or think we have certainty, we're usually actually talking about probability. In other words, I'm 100% certain that this is going to happen. Well, there is no such thing as 100% probability. Okay, you can come close. But actually, things in life are determined much more by probability than by certainty. And the same with knowledge. A lot of people assert that they have knowledge about something, but really what they have is conjecture. And what is a conjecture? It's when you make a logical leap from something known to something unknown. In other words, when you take so-called facts and then you make a prediction from it or a conclusion from it, that's not really justified. Similarly, people think they're seeing reality, but actually what they're seeing most of the time is their theory about reality, their understanding of reality, their rationalizations, and so forth about reality. Not really reality itself. They're seeing their ideas about reality. And similarly, when we think we see causality or law, we're actually seeing an anecdote or a coincidence. A coincidence is something that just happens because of the various random and periodic things that occur in the world. Certain of them are going to come together. And there's no real cause, there's no real reason why that happens. It just happened. Even the Buddha talks about coincidence. The same type of thing is true of predictions. What we think we see prophecy, it really is just a forecast. And what's the difference? A prophecy is, this is going to happen, and it does. A forecast is, well, tomorrow we'll have 50% cloud cover with a 30% chance of showers from 10 to 12. In other words, it's qualified. It's probabilistic. It's not absolute. Sometimes someone can make a prediction, and by luck they're right, and then they look like a prophet. Are they really? No. No, only someone who makes a forecast of qualified information is actually speaking truthfully. Because we don't know. Nobody knows what the future brings. Sometimes we think we see a skilled investor or powerful CEO or a great leader. And actually they're just a lucky idiot. They happen to be in the right place at the right time. Or they happen to have, the Hollywood good looks, or the baritone speaking voice, or they have a good ghostwriter, or they have a good publicity agent. In my business of spiritual teaching, there are a lot of people who are regarded as great teachers, but they aren't really great teachers. They're simply popular. They have the looks, they have the manner. Maybe they were born into a family where they easily acquired social skills and can present things nicely in front of a crowd. That doesn't make them great spiritual people. Great spiritual people means practitioners. And spiritual practice is something that takes place alone, in a very private space. There aren't any people watching. There can't be. That would destroy the conditions necessary for great spiritual achievements. So the actual great spiritual people are almost unknown. Just because somebody is popular doesn't really mean a whole lot. And the same with wisdom and outperformance. That outperformance means someone whose performance is terrific, beyond the norm. But what we're really seeing in most cases is either survivorship bias, or as it's sometimes called, sampling bias. In other words, we only see the winners. We only see the ones who are popular. We only see the ones who make it past all the failures. And that is largely determined by luck, not skill. Same thing with return on investment. Maybe somebody just got lucky. In fact, usually that's the case. They just got lucky. There happened to be a bull market for a few years, and they went along with it, and practically anything they did made money. It was like that in the 1990s. Even an unskilled guy like myself could make money at investment because the market itself was rising. A rising tide floats all boats. What we're really seeing is volatility. We're really seeing an accident, a trend, a fad, a phase. And when it's over, then we see who the real professionals are. And the same thing, we think we're seeing a deterministic variation in the market, in society, in politics, in religion. But what we're really seeing is a stochastic variation. Stochastic means random. Randomness can really be deceptive. For example, there's a good puzzle to tell if somebody knows actually what is randomness. If you have a coin and you flip that coin, what are the probability of it being head or tails? 50%, right? If it's truly random. But let's say you flip the coin 9 times and it comes up heads each time. What is the probability that the 10th toss is going to come up heads as well? And the naive person will say, well, 50%. But no, it's actually 1 squared plus 2 squared plus 3 squared plus 4 squared plus 5 squared, etc. So it works out to be about 1 in 10,000 or more. So try to understand. Probability means the likelihood of something unusual happening. 10 heads in a row of coin flips is very unusual. So if you get 9 in a row, heads, the odds of the next one coming up heads is very, very small because it's a stochastic probability, stochastic variation. It's not simply heads or tails chances. No, because you have to consider what already happened in the past. And we'll get really deeply into that kind of analysis in this series. So for the same reason, what we often think we see as signal is actually noise. It may be very impressive noise. It may be very convincing noise. The Industrial Revolution, the prosperity of human society based on fossil fuels, looks very convincing, very impressive, but guess what? It's just noise. In the wide sweep of history, in another 100 years, it's going to be over. And that's nothing. That's just a drop in the bucket. That's like one human lifetime, maybe a little more, 3 generations. So in that amount of time, what we see as a huge, fantastically important event just becomes a blip of noise on the radar screen. And the actual human way of life turns out to be much more humble than what we're used to. And finally, when we think we see a deduction, a logical conclusion from evidence, most of the time what we're seeing is induction, guessing. So that's because of our epistemological deficiency. So all these things that we think we see are actually wrong. They're illusory. They're ignorance. And of course, the great burning question that's going to come up, and I know somebody's going to ask it, so I'm going to head you off at the pass here, is why? Why do we see all these things wrong? And the reason is very simple. And if you take nothing more away from this video, it should be this. We don't see that the rare, unexpected, improbable, extreme, unpredictable, or even impossible events have the greatest impact. It's just like I was saying about famous people. They get a lucky break. All it takes is one. You know, if the head of some big movie studio sees you at the beach and says, hey, here's my card, call me at the office tomorrow, I want to talk to you about a contract. He's seeing someone that he knows he can make into a star. Now, is that because of your incredible good looks or talent or anything like that? No. No, it's whim. This guy's at the beach. He needs a star for his next production. Things aren't working out with the established talent, or maybe he wants to bring in a newcomer just to put everybody else in their place. He sees you on the beach, and that's how it happens. That's how it really happens. I lived in Hollywood for a couple of years. Okay. I was very close friends with an editor, a film editor, back in the days when I was a musician. And the stories he told me about how people get parts in the movies, well, they're not something I would want to repeat in, in this kind of a video. But they're generally not based on skill, but luck, or the reason that people get rich. They are very lucky. They pull off something that they ordinarily would not be able to get away with. But they happen to be in the right place at the right time. Bill Gates. Bill Gates knew somebody at IBM. He knew they were shopping around for an operating system. He wasn't smart enough to write one. Gary Kildall was. I was working for Gary at the time. So Gary Kildall was in actual negotiations with IBM, but he didn't want to sign a NDA, non-disclosure agreement, because he wanted to be able to sell his operating system to anyone and everyone. So Bill Gates, whose father was a lawyer, by the way, Bill Gates said, oh, well, I can just go down the street and buy an operating system and then put my brand on it and sell it to IBM. And that's what he did. He happened to be in the right place at the right time with the right bargaining skills, and he wasn't afraid to make an exclusive deal. So he got the big cherry, and he subsequently built it into a huge company, but that company is a one-trick pony. Oh, maybe two-trick pony. They also came up with Office. Luck has a disproportionate amount of influence in the successes and the failures of ordinary and even special people. And the way it works is that the more unlikely a piece of luck is, the more extreme an unanticipated event is, the more influence it has. Why? Because people are fragile. People are fragile. So if an extraordinary piece of luck comes along, good or bad, it has a non-linear influence on their fortunes. Remember, fragility is a non-linear sensitivity to volatility, and antifragility is a non-linear sensitivity to benefit from volatility. So when volatility happens, if a person is in an anti-fragile position, they benefit. So that was the difference between Gary Kildall and Gates. Gates was in an anti-fragile position. Kildall was in a fragile position because he wanted to preserve his existing market for his operating system. That means he was sensitive to damage by nonlinear events. Gates was in an anti-fragile position because really, except for his basic language, he didn't have much of anything going for him. He couldn't lose, in other words. So he was ready to make the deal with the devil. He was ready, willing, and able, as the son of a lawyer, to negotiate a killer deal. And he did. He was anti-fragile, not because of any special skill, but because of A, luck, and B, his positioning. So what we're going to talk about in this series is how to position yourself so that you are anti-fragile to the most unlikely, improbable, extreme circumstances that could come about. And as it turns out, the Buddha's teaching has a lot of information on this subject.
Yeah.